Story 1. The Shadows of Cell Block C. I had been in Iron Ridge Penitentiary for nearly 5 years, convicted for a crime I didn't commit. The place was a hellhole, but I kept my head down and did my time. Cell Block C was notorious, even among the other inmates. Whispers of strange occurrences and disappearances circulated, but most dismissed them as ghost stories to pass the time. One evening, I was assigned to solitary confinement in Cell Block C. The guards had it in for me, always looking for an excuse to make my life harder. The isolation room was a dark concrete cell with a single flickering light bulb. The air was cold and damp, and the silence was oppressive. As the hours dragged on, I tried to sleep, but a sense of unease kept me awake. The flickering light cast eerie shadows on the walls, and I could hear faint whispers, as if voices were trapped within the concrete. I sat up, straining to hear, but the whispers stopped. Just as I was about to lie back down, I heard a scratching sound from the corner of the cell. My heart pounded as I squinted into the darkness, but there was nothing there. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, and I realized it was coming from beneath the floor. I backed away, pressing myself against the wall, as the concrete seemed to crack and shift. Suddenly, a hand burst through the floor, followed by another. A figure clawed its way up, covered in dirt and grime. It was an inmate, or what was left of one, his eyes hollow, his skin rotting. Crawled towards me, his mouth opening and closing as if trying to speak. "Help. Me," he rasped, his voice barely more than a whisper. I froze, terror paralyzing me. The figure collapsed, and the light bulb flickered one last time before plunging the cell into darkness. I felt a cold hand grip my ankle, and I screamed, kicking frantically. The door to the cell flew open and light flooded in as guards rushed in, pulling me out. They didn't believe my story, of course. They chalked it up to hallucinations from the isolation. But I knew what I saw, and I knew that Cell Block C held more than just prisoners. There were shadows there, restless, angry shadows that wanted revenge. Story 2. The Infirmary. Being a prison nurse wasn't easy, but it was a job, and it paid the bills. St. Drake's Penitentiary had a reputation for being tough, but I figured I could handle it. Most of the inmates kept to themselves, and the guards were more concerned with keeping order than looking out for the medical staff. One night I was on the graveyard shift in the infirmary. It was usually quiet, and I used the time to catch up on paperwork. But that night was different. Around midnight, a guard brought in an inmate, James McAllister, who had been in solitary for over a week. He was unresponsive, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. "Found him like this," the guard said, dumping McAllister on the cot. "Doc says to keep an eye on him until he comes back in the morning." I nodded, setting up an IV and checking his vitals. As I worked, I noticed strange marks on his arms and legs, deep scratches and bruises that looked like they were self-inflicted. I tried to clean them, but he flinched, his eyes suddenly locking onto mine. "Don't touch them," he whispered, his voice hoarse. I pulled back, startled. "What happened to you?" I asked, but he just shook his head, eyes wide with terror. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The infirmary felt colder, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. I heard faint whispers and footsteps echoing through the empty halls. I checked on McAllister periodically, but he remained silent, eyes darting around the room as if following something unseen. Around 3 a.m., the power went out. The emergency lights flickered on, casting long shadows across the room. I heard a low growl and turned to see McAllister convulsing on the cot, his body arching in unnatural angles. I rushed to his side, but as soon as I touched him, he stopped, his eyes rolling back in his head. I backed away, my heart racing. The shadows seemed to grow thicker, darker, and I could hear the whispers more clearly now. They were calling my name. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it around the room, but there was nothing there. Suddenly, the door to the infirmary slammed shut and the temperature plummeted. I felt a cold breath on my neck and spun around to see a figure standing in the corner. A gaunt, skeletal figure with hollow eyes. It pointed at McAllister, its mouth moving silently. I ran to the door, pounding on it, screaming for help. The figure moved closer, its bony fingers reaching out. Just as it was about to touch me, the power came back on, and the figure vanished. The guards found me huddled in the corner, shaking. They didn't believe my story, said I was just tired, overworked. But I knew what I saw. There was something in that infirmary, something that had come from McAllister, and it had almost gotten me too. Story 3, The Night Walker. I'd been a guard at Rockwood Penitentiary for nearly a decade, and I thought I'd seen it all, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that summer night. The inmates called it The Night Walker, a ghost story meant to scare the new guys. I didn't believe in ghosts, but after that night, I wasn't so sure. It was a hot, humid evening, and the air felt thick with tension. I was on the late shift, making my rounds in the maximum security wing. The inmates were restless, banging on their cell doors and shouting obscenities. I ignored them, focused on getting through my shift. As I passed cell 23, I heard a low, guttural growl. I stopped and shone my flashlight into the cell. The inmate, Carl Henderson, was huddled in the corner, his eyes wide with fear. "He's coming," Henderson whispered, his voice trembling. "The Night Walker is coming." "Cut the crap, Henderson," I said, but his fear was palpable. I moved on, but the feeling of unease grew stronger. The lights flickered, and the air grew colder. I heard footsteps behind me, but when I turned, there was no one there. The inmates had gone silent, their eyes following me as I walked down the hall. I reached the end of the wing and turned back, but the hallway seemed longer, darker. I could see a shadow moving at the far end, but it was too dark to make out. I quickened my pace, my flashlight flickering. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I stopped in front of cell 23 again. Henderson was gone. His cell was empty, the door still locked. I felt a chill run down my spine. The shadow was right behind me now, and I could feel its cold breath on my neck. I turned, shining my flashlight, but it sputtered and died. In the darkness, I saw a figure, tall, gaunt, with hollow eyes and a mouth twisted in a silent scream. It reached out with long, skeletal fingers, and I felt a cold, clammy hand wrap around my throat. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred, and I felt myself slipping into unconsciousness. Just as I was about to pass out, the lights came back on and the figure vanished. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. The other guards found me there, clutching my throat. They said I was imagining things, that it was just the heat getting to me. But I knew better. The Night Walker was real, and it had almost taken me. I never worked the night shift again after that. The memory of those hollow eyes and that cold, clammy hand still haunts me. Rockwood Penitentiary holds many secrets, and some are best left forgotten.